This is Recipe for Sleep, a podcast where we dust off very old cookbooks and let them lull us into dreamland. I'm Erin Brindley, a chef and storyteller. I'm going to read to you from an old cookbook full of recipes and stories, and hopefully it's just interesting enough to keep your mind from ruminating, but just light enough that you can let it go when sleep arrives. Once again, we are still deep in the pages of 1894's The American Pastry Cook. Like our own Great British Baking Show coach, Jessup Whitehead breaks down the basics of meringues and sponges in this episode, and we'll dip our toe into Blanc Mange at the end. I love this section. It reminds me of one of my favorite modern cookbooks, Ratio by Michael Ruhlman, in that it really takes the mystery out of an amazing dessert confection. I found it so easy to get swept away in these recipes, or receipts as they used to be called, and I think you'll find them to be just the perfect place to rest your busy brain. Now it's time to put away anything you are doing and snuggle deep into your sweet covers. Softly close your eyes and imagine the kitchen of your mind. There are two cupboards there, yesterday's cupboard for all the things that have already happened that your mind wants to chew on, and tomorrow's cupboard for all the things you're going to do or what's going to happen later. It's time to put everything away in those cupboards. Imagine closing each one. You made it to this cozy, quiet time of day where there's nothing to do but listen to me read old recipes to you until you drift off to sleep. 137. Kisses. Not dictionary kisses. Unfortunately, perhaps, for the succinctness of the following disquisition, the dictionaries describe another kind of kisses, which in some people's minds may possibly intrude and get mixed up with these. But they ought not, for it is not likely that the two varieties have any qualities in common. These kisses that we are going to tell you how to make are soft, tender, sweet, fragile, round, plump, smooth, delicate, nice, light, and they are hollow. That is to say, they should be so if perfectly well made, but some people go on trying all their lives and never produce a perfect kiss. On second thoughts, for fear of the idea of the dictionary kiss, perhaps we had better call these trifles by their French names. And you may find them if you look in Mr. Thackeray's book, Pendennis. It must be about the middle of the first volume, and can easily be found because the French words are in italics. Mr. P comes to Clavering Hall, and he finds the Clavering's young one sitting on the carpet, with his face smeared all over with the species of lather contained in the confection called meringue à la crème. That is one sort. Those are our egg kisses, filled with whipped cream. So of course they have to be made hollow, and a few beside first-rate workmen can make them so. But there are numerous varieties of the kiss meringue, and they that can make them are generally proud of their knowledge. Now, plenty of people will make cake icing and drop lumps of it on pans or on paper, and bake them and call them kisses or meringues, hard, rough, and cracked, open little lumps of sugar as they are. And many a country baker exhibits the same thing in his window, never seeming to know that there is a trick and touch beyond that, with the same material that makes the meringues swell and round itself like the top of a mushroom, into a shell as thin as paper. The meringues and finger macaroons of the fine confectionaries. There are measures and rules for these, and the finest are easy enough when one knows how. These are trifles, of course, not to be compared with the importance of making good bread and puddings. Yet if one makes such pretties at all, they should be in the highest degree excellent. We have found oral instructions always useless to the many who have tried to make fine meringues. The cookbooks give a dry formula and leave you to hit or miss as it may happen. Therefore, we shall be particular to explain all the trick there is about them, believing that at any rate, printed words may be quite good as actual examples for intelligent readers, who can refer to them again if necessary. 138. Meringue paste. This, in various forms, has had to be mentioned often in these columns. It is always white of egg and sugar, but sometimes soft meringue, as on lemon pies, and sometimes nearly all sugar, as in cake icing and kisses. 139. Meringues à la crème. These are made in two different ways. The first makes perhaps the finest and smoothest glazed meringue, resembling frosted glass, but the paste must be used immediately as it soon becomes too thin to keep shape. 1 pound of powdered sugar, 10 whites of eggs, 1 or 2 teaspoonfuls of flavoring extract. Have everything cold and dry to begin with. Whip the white of eggs in a deep bowl with a whisk made of a bunch of wires, till it will not fall out when turned upside down. Add the sugar and flavoring all at once, and stir it in just enough to mix it well and no more. Have ready some strips of writing paper, 2 inches wide, and pieces of boards, not pine, to bake the meringues on. Place spoonfuls, egg-shaped, on the strips of paper, not too close. Smooth them with a knife. Sift powdered sugar all over them. Shake off the surplus. Place the strips on the boards and dry bake them with the oven door partly open. They need to bake nearly or quite half an hour. They can be lifted off the paper when cold. The boards prevent a crust forming on the bottom, and the soft remainder inside can be scooped out. Fill as directed in the next receipt. 140. Meringue puffs, an easier way. 1 pound of granulated sugar, 8 whites of eggs, flavoring extract, 3 drops of acetic acid or a pinch of tartaric, or a little lemon juice. Put half the whites in a bowl without beating, and all the sugar with them, and beat together with a wooden spoon or paddle. It may save half the labor and ensure success to have all the utensils and ingredients quite cold to begin with. It quickens the process if the beating can be done with 2 paddles, using both hands as regular workmen do. The bowl should be a deep one, holding 2 quarts. The sugar and egg at first are as stiff as dough. Beat rapidly and constantly for about 15 minutes, when it should be white and rather firm cake icing. Now add the remaining 4 whites of egg, one at a time, and beat a few minutes between each one. But before the last one is added, put in the acid and the flavoring. The whole time of beating is about 25 minutes. An essential point is to beat the icing after the addition of each white until it will again draw up to peaks after the paddle is lifted from it, except the last white, which should not be beaten as much as it forms the gloss and smoothness on the meringues when they are baked. Drop this meringue paste in egg shapes on baking pans instead of on paper, as in the last receipt, and these, being made with granulated sugar instead of powder, do not need any sugar sifted over. They look better without. Bake in a very slow oven till pale straw-colored and dry. They slip from the pans easily when cold. Cut out the thin bottom crusts with a penknife and fill the meringues with whipped cream, sweetened and flavored, or with wine jelly, and either place 2 together by the bottoms or join them 2 together side by side with melted candy or icing, like an open walnut shell, and pile whipped cream or chopped jelly upon them. These meringues likewise look well singly as cups filled with bright jellies of different colors and with ice creams. Instead of placing the meringue paste on the pans with a spoon and knife, it is much better to use the sack and tube, such as ladyfingers are made with a funnel-shaped canvas bag with a tin tube at the pointed end, and the tube about a half-inch in diameter at the narrow end for these. Fill the sack with the paste and press it out in the size and shape desired. 141. Rose meringue puffs. Having made the meringue paste according to the preceding directions, color it, or a part of it, of a delicate pink with flavor with rose extract. Drop with the stack and tube pieces like large marbles on baking pans previously greased, then wiped dry, and bake slowly without any color. These rise rounded and nearly hollow and have a gauzy appearance when rightly baked. Sometimes the first panful of any of these varieties put into range will run together and melt and come out worthless, and the next come out perfect meringues, or one side of a pan will be spoiled and the remainder good. This shows that the baking is the critical part of the making, and that is what we can never teach by word of mouth. At a certain gentle heat, the egg in the meringues cooks and dries in shape, but at a higher degree, the sugar melts and runs into candy and bubbles. At an insufficient degree of heat, the meringue dries as it would in the sun and does not swell and change in its appearance. In the brick oven, after the bread has been withdrawn, is the proper place to bake meringues. 142. Chocolate meringue puffs. There is nothing of the kind choicer or more fragile than these, only a slight change in the ingredients from the foregoing varieties. 1 pound of granulated sugar, 6 whites of eggs, 3 ounces grated common chocolate, a heaping cupful, 3 drops of acetic acid, 2 teaspoonfuls of vanilla extract. Beat up the icing as directed for meringue puffs, using 6 whites instead of 8, and when it is finished, mix the chocolate thoroughly. Drop round portions with a sack and tube on baking pans and bake at a very gentle heat. These rise rounded like a mushroom and nearly hollow. They slip from the pans easily when cold. 143. Almond meringue puffs. Take some of the white icing as made for meringue puffs. Drop round portions like large marbles on baking pans and stick 5 or 6 halves of almonds that have been blanched and split in each one in circular order and bake carefully. 144. Coconut macaroons. Make the white icing or meringue paste as directed for meringue puffs and add to it when finished 8 ounces of desiccated coconut. Drop pieces size of walnuts with a spoon and knife on greased baking pans and bake in a very slack oven. These are favorites for the cake baskets. The sugared kind of desiccated coconut is the best to use. Care should be taken to have the icing well made and firm before adding it, for no additions of flour or starch will do any good if the icing is inclined to run in the first place. And too much care cannot be taken with the baking. Let the macaroons remain on the pans till cold. 145. Almond rings and fingers. Make the same as the preceding with 8 ounces of blanched almonds minced very small. Put a smaller tube in the forcing sack and form finger shapes and rings of the almond meringue paste on baking pans and bake them in a very slack oven. These all bake light and nearly hollow and have a fine glaze surface. The foregoing varieties, which can all be made out of one large bowl of meringue paste, form a handsome assortment for the cake stands, to build pyramids, to place around glass bowls of fruit, to decorate cakes, and to fill icing or nougat baskets with. 146. Common macaroons. 12 ounces of almonds, 8 ounces of granulated sugar, 4 ounces of flour, 4 eggs, pinch of salt. Crush the almonds without taking off the skins with a rolling pin upon the table. Mix them in the sugar and flour together in a bowl. Drop the eggs in the middle and mix the whole into a rather soft dough. Place in lumps the size of cherries on baking pans very slightly greased. Bake in an oven light brown. A few bitter almonds or peach kernels mixed in improves them. 147. Meringue cakes in general. Make white icing or meringue paste according to directions in preceding articles, and add 2 more whites to thin it. Color some of it and leave some white. Spread it over sheets of any sort of cake or on small cakes, and bake in a very slack oven, with something under the cakes to keep them from too much baking at the bottom. Granulated sugar may be sifted over the top before baking, or colored sugar sand on the white. 148. About eggs and egg beating. One of the very first cookbooks I ever picked up cautioned the reader not to stop beating the eggs that were once commenced, because they would go down, and no human power can whip them up to light again. The statement is altogether erroneous, and a very mischievous one for the class of learners who are always seeking excuses for bad work. And it went on to say, and sometimes they cannot be whipped to perfect lightness at all. In that case, you should procure some fresher eggs, etc. Hotel work admits of no apologies, and when the steward and cooks plan the dinner, they cannot afford to make the appearance of a dish contingent upon the caprice of a dozen eggs, whether they will or will not choose to come up light. The ease or difficulty of beating up eggs, meringue, icing, sponge cake, and the rest depends on the degree of density or viscosity of the eggs or the white of eggs, and that often depends on the temperature. They are thicker when cold, and when warm, the whites of eggs sometimes become so thin as to have no more power to hold the air bubbles beaten into it than so much water. Only last winter, a man who had worked with me was boarding at a small hotel, and happened in the bar room when some men who couldn't were trying to beat up eggs for the Christmas eggnog. They had the eggs in a tin pail and sat by the stove taking spells with each other and beating for all that was out, without the least signs of success. As soon as the man saw what was the matter, he took the pail, went outside, and set it on the snow, and in 10 minutes he'd succeeded in converting the eggs to a pailful of foam, and the men who couldn't allowed that it was a trick worth knowing. Sometimes the eggs can be beaten up quite as easily when warm, but that is when they have lost part of the water they contain by evaporation, as even eggs in the shell will do in dry weather, and thus become as thick as if made cold. 149. Dried eggs. White of eggs poured thinly on platters soon evaporates and becomes a powder like pulverized glass. This is easily soluble, even to the touch of a moist finger, can be kept for a long time dry, and then dissolved in water and used as well as fresh. If the powder obtained from 2 cups of white of eggs be dissolved in only 1 cup of water, it can be beaten into a froth for icing, etc., in a minute or 2, whether warm or cold. That is the result of condensation. The yolks of eggs dried alone are not soluble, but the entire egg beaten together and dried slowly in water, and more rapidly if mixed with sugar before drying. 150. The varieties of macaroons, kisses, and meringues that might be given would fill several columns, but there is no need. Scores of things of this class with imposing names are but the variations played upon the foundation of a few simple and well-known combinations. Anyone who has made perfectly the few varieties we have described can easily discover new changes for himself. The proportion of mixed almonds in the white macaroons may be doubled. Meringues baked on boards may be extremely small, placed two together with a spot of apricot jam enclosed. Some may be dredged while still moist before baking with chopped pistachio nuts, etc., etc. These things are not needed by name to vary the hotel bill of fare as some other things are, but always bunched together as assorted cakes, small cakes, or cakes and confectionaries. The following summary will have meaning for those who may have essayed the making of meringue à la crème or macaroons and failed. 1 pound of sugar and 4 whites of eggs beaten with a paddle till light, about half an hour, makes a stiff cake icing and bakes hard and solid in the shape of it dropped on the pan. 1 pound of sugar and 6 whites makes soft or finishing icing and bakes in meringues that are partly hollow but still dry and hard, rattling together like walnuts. 1 pound and 8 whites makes thin and fragile meringues we have described in the finer qualities of macaroons, and when the paste beats up easily, as is the case when the conditions are right, another white may be added with advantage. For 12 whites to a pound, whip the whites with a wire egg whisk first. The acetic acid should be added to the icing only when it is nearly finished. Its effect in whitening and stiffening the icing will be seen at once. The common trouble in making icing or meringue paste is its tendency to run out of shape and drip off the cakes covered with it. This cannot be remedied by the addition of more sugar, which indeed only increases the trouble, but must be prevented by care in the beginning, by having the ingredients cold and not damp, and by using enough eggs and sugar at the starting to make a stiff dough that can hardly be stirred, but will get thinner as the sugar dissolves, and the beating done must be rapid beating, not stirring around. Granulated sugar can be made into meringues or icing with more ease and certainty than powdered sugar. The annexed are candies, but match well the meringues and macaroons, with the drawback, however, of being solid sugar and costlier for their size than the articles of their list. These caramels sell well in the shops. 151. Coconut caramels, red and white. 1 pound of granulated sugar, 8 ounces of desiccated coconut, a small cupful of water. Coloring. Set the sugar and water over the fire in a small, bright kettle, and boil about 5 minutes or until the syrup bubbles up thick and ropes from the spoon, and do not stir it. Then put in the coconut, stir to mix, and begin at once and drop the candy by tablespoonfuls on a buttered baking pan. Reserve a few spoonfuls, make it hot again, and color with cochineal and thin with a spoonful of water. Drop a spot of the red on each one of the white caramels. Should the candy become set in the kettle before it is used, it may be dissolved by adding a spoonful of water and setting it on the range again. When fresh grated coconut is used, the sugar needs to be boiled to the candy point, 3 or 4 minutes longer. The yolk of an egg may be mixed with a portion of the candy instead of red coloring as above to make a yellow color, and melted chocolate added for another variety. 152. We set out white cakes, fruit cakes, pound and yeast-raised cakes, but if we may judge by the criterion of the quantity used where people have free choice, sponge cake and the numerous varieties from the same mixture, all made without butter, hold their first place as favorites. Italian cakes is the general term for the class. Diet bread cake is the fanciful name for sponge cake sometimes found in old-time cookbooks. The loaf cakes of this sort, whether large or small, are not so good when stale, and in some large confectionaries having reputations to keep up, it is made a rule never to sell any over-day old over the counter, but such stock is disposed of at a reduced rate to small dealers. The good quality of all these varieties depends upon the same precautions being observed as in the case of meringues and macaroons, just fully explained in the preceding columns. 153. Lady fingers or Naples biscuits. 8 ounces of powdered sugar, 1/4 cupful of water, half gill, 9 eggs, 10 ounces of flour. Separate the eggs, the whites from the yolks, and set the whites on ice in a large bowl. Have the flour also in a cold place. Put the sugar and water in a deep, bright saucepan over the fire. Add the yolks of the eggs and beat with a wire whisk till the mixture is warm but not hot, 5 minutes. Then set the saucepan in a pan of cold water and continue beating 15 minutes more till the mixture becomes cold, thick, and whitish, and twice its original bulk. Whip the whites to a firm froth that will not fall out of the bowl upside down, and mix them lightly with the other. Then stir in the flour, also without beating, and only stirred with a spoon sufficiently to hide it from sight. The above receipt is well worth learning, and is good for a great variety of Italian cakes, and will not have to be repeated here, except as we shall show another way of doing the same thing. To form the lady fingers, put some of the batter into the forcing sack, having a tin tube in it from 1/4 to 1/2 inch in diameter, and force it out in finger lengths on sheets of blank paper, with 1 inch of space between each one. Sift powdered sugar plentifully over them. Take hold of the 2 corners of the sheet of paper, which may be half newspaper size, and shake off the surplus sugar on the table, and lay the sheet of cakes on a baking pan placed ready. Bake 8 or 10 minutes in a moderate oven, allowing the cakes to become no more than a deep straw color. To get the lady fingers off the paper, it is necessary to lay the sheet, cake downwards, on a table and brush the paper over with water. The cakes will then peel off. Place them 2 together. The moisture will cause them to adhere. 154. Assorted Italian cakes 6 ways. 1. Sponge drops. Proceed as for lady fingers and drop the batter on the paper in a round shape, large or small according to fancy. 2. Place flat sponge drops by 2s together with jelly spread between them, or lemon or orange paste. 3. Have ready a lot of sponge drops. Make 2 or more colors and flavors, boiled icing or glaze, directions for making which have already been given, and dip the bottom of each cake, holding it on a fork. Then set the cakes on baking pans to dry. 4. Instead of dipping the bottoms, let the tops of the sponge drops receive the icing, and when dry, place them by 2s together of different colors and glaze, with yellow orange paste or conserve between them. 5. Have some finely minced almonds, pistachios, hickory nuts, or desiccated coconut ready, and mix with the batter after the manner of macaroons, and dredge granulated sugar over the cakes instead of powdering before baking. 6. Instead of mixing the minced almonds in the batter, mingle powdered sugar with it and dredge it over the moist tops of the cakes before baking. 155. Small Savoy cakes or Savoy biscuits. Make the same batter as for lady fingers and flavor it with vanilla. Bake it in either small paper cases made on writing paper or in gem or patty pans fastened together by the dozen. Prepare the cases or pans by brushing them over with clear melted butter and shaking powdered sugar about them instead of flour as with other cakes, and sift powdered sugar over the tops of the cakes before baking. These cakes bake quickly and should be light in color. 156. Savoy cake, large. The same as the preceding, baked in a large or fancy-shaped mold, coated with powdered sugar. Powdered sugar also sifted on top of the cake, forming a glazed surface when baked. When we come to examine thoroughly the most authoritative, the most noted, and the costliest works on cookery extant, and to sift their methods and directions in the full light of a lifetime's working experience, in order to discover the simple principles that must underlie every successful method, a good deal is revealed that looks like charlatanry and owlish pretense. In this little matter of Italian cakes, to look at the imposing lists of varieties, each with its name, its own set of weights and proportions, and mode of procedure, one would think it would take about a century to learn them all. But when we know in advance that every one must rest upon the simple sponge cake mixture, however well disguised, we are acquainted with the whole of them already. The standard sponge cake mixture, as it may fairly be called, is 1 pound of sugar, 12 eggs, and 12 ounces of flour. The nature of the ingredients will not admit of a deviation of over an ounce or two. But if in writing a receipt we designate, say, 3/5 of these proportions of each article, and for the next variety 2/5 or 2/3 or 1/2, the only difference in result will be in the number of cakes produced. But the unfamiliar weights and numbers make it appear on the surface as if each variety had an entirely different composition. The work that the head of either culinary department of a hotel can actually do with his own hands must be but a small portion of the whole, and however skillful he may be, he must be largely dependent upon his assistants for the general excellence of his department. But these assistants cannot know and are not expected to learn a different formula for every different thing they are required to make. The head man will get the more help from those working under him, the more he can simplify the processes he gives them to carry out. The receipt already given under the head of Naples biscuits is a good one, but it is only sponge cake mixture at last, and there is a simpler way that may be entrusted to the boys with perfect safety, to make all the varieties of Italian cakes that are at all necessary or desirable, and that is only to make common sponge cake batter in a plain and common way. 157. Sponge cake. 14 ounces of sugar, 12 eggs, 12 ounces of flour. Put the eggs and sugar together in a kettle, tin pail, or deep pan. Set in a vessel of ice water, and beat the mixture rapidly for a half hour by the clock. Then lightly stir in the flour. If the beating be faithfully performed, this sponge cake batter can be used to make ladyfingers, Savoy cakes, plain unglazed sponge cakes, jelly rolls, and the half-dozen Italian cakes already described. One day one of my boys showed me such an assortment as the above, all made out of a kettle of sponge cake batter 4 times the quantity of the receipt. And when they have been approved, with a sly look, he said, "But I was late and only beat the eggs and sugar 20 minutes. Your ingredients were in good condition, and the atmosphere is dry and cold. There are exceptions to every rule, but you must work by the rule and not the exception. Besides, there is a great deal in knowing how to beat effectively." 158. Butter sponge cake. 1 pound of granulated sugar, 10 eggs, 8 or 10 ounces of butter, 1 cupful of milk or half pint, 2 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, 1½ pounds of flour. Beat the eggs and sugar together a few minutes as if for sponge cake. Melt the butter and beat it in. Add the milk, then the powder and the flour, and stir up well. flavor if desired. If I had to lose the knowledge of all kinds of cakes but one, I should choose the above. It is comparatively cheap. When fresh, it is as good as any, and answers more purposes than any other mixture made. The exigencies that often overtake us when the hotel business is good, I have frequently begun when the doors were just open for dinner, and had large sheets of this light cake, 1 or 2 inches thick, and nicely glazed with sugar baked on top, ready to send in when the plates were changed, either as pudding or cake, about 25 minutes from the time of beginning, which could not be done with any richer mixture. 159. White butter sponge cake. The same as the preceding, made with the surplus whites of eggs, often left over from salad making, etc. Use 1 pound of whites instead of the 10 eggs, and add an ounce more butter. It makes jelly cakes, may have raisins or currants mixed in, and if made cold enough to keep shape, makes a very fair sponge drops or other small cakes. It is also best for the following. 160. Cream cake or Washington pie. Bake the butter sponge cake on jelly pans, quite thin, and place 2 sheets together with pastry cream thickly spread between. The pastry cream is the same as used to fill cream puffs, which see our index. 161. Cornstarch Blanc Mange. 2 quarts of milk and a cupful more. 12 ounces of sugar. 5 ounces of cornstarch. 1 ounce of butter. A pinch of salt. Flavoring. Boil the milk with the sugar in it. Mix the starch with an extra cup of milk. Stir it in and let cook a few minutes. Take from the fire. Beat in the butter to whiten it. Flavor and put the Blanc Mange immediately into custard cups previously wet with water. When cold, take it out of the cups and serve either with a little sweetened cream or fruit jelly. Instead of cups, it may be spread in bright pans, cut in square blocks, and served with a smooth bottom side up. 162. Cornstarch jelly. This can be very nice when nicely made, if not made sour and harsh with too much lemon, nor hard and opaque with too much starch. 1 quart of water and half pint over. 12 ounces of sugar. 1 small lemon. 6 ounces of cornstarch, 3 heaping tablespoonfuls. Boil the water with the sugar in it, and add to it the juice of the lemon and about half the rind shaved off thin and cut in small pieces. Mix the starch with the extra cup of water. Stir it into the boiling syrup and let boil slowly for about 10 minutes to lose its milky appearance and become almost clear. Pour it into custard cups or any kind of molds. Serve in saucers with a spoonful of sweetened cream, whipped or froth. This jelly looks better if colored either with burnt sugar or like the following kind. 163. Tapioca jelly. 1 quart of raspberry or other fruit juice strained. 1 cupful of water. 12 ounces of sugar. 4 ounces of tapioca. Crush the tapioca, if the large kind, by rolling it, and steep it 2 hours in the water and some of the fruit juice. Boil the rest of the raspberry juice with the sugar in it. Add the steeped tapioca and let simmer 15 minutes or more. Put in cups or other molds and serve it cold with a spoonful of egg custard in the saucer or with whipped cream. This can also be made with water and flavoring as directed for cornstarch jelly. 164. Gelatin Blanc Mange. 2 quarts of rich milk. 12 ounces of sugar. 2 ounces of gelatin. Flavorings. 1 small cupful of cream to whiten it. Set the milk over a fire in a bright kettle with the sugar and gelatin in it, and stir them occasionally with wire egg beater till the gelatin is all dissolved, but do not let it boil lest the milk curdle. Strain into a pan and set away to cool. After it is cooled, stir in the flavoring, lemon, vanilla, almond, cinnamon, or any other, and the cup of cream. Pour it into molds or custard cups or an inch deep in milk pans, to be cut when set in squares or diamonds, and serve with cream or diluted fruit jelly. The foregoing is the basis of several kinds of creams to be described further on, and will be referred to and not repeated. A useful rule to keep in mind is 1½ ounces of gelatin to a quart of water for jelly, etc., but 1 ounce only to a quart of milk. Cooper's sheet gelatin sells about half a price of the imported kinds. It is tasteless and as good as any, except it is liable to curdle the milk on actual boiling. The transparent gelatins, or isinglass, on the other hand, are as liable to burn on the bottom and are troublesome to dissolve. 165. Condensing milk for Blanc Manges and creams. Skimmed milk, which is superabundant in many hotels, can be immensely improved for the pastry cook's purpose by condensation. No process is required but to set 4 quarts of milk on the range in a shallow pan with the sugar in it that is required for 2 quarts, probably 12 ounces, and let the milk simmer till reduced to 2 quarts. The cheesy coating that forms on boiled milk will not appear on that which has sugar in it. 166. Jeune mange. The Blanc Mange of the preceding receipt with 6 yolks of eggs beaten in after the gelatin is dissolved and just before taking from the fire. Divide the Blanc Mange and color only half of it yellow with 3 or 4 yolks, and thus have 2 colors cut in small blocks to serve in the same saucers. Jaune is yellow, as Blanc is white. 167. Almond cream Blanc Mange. 1 pound of sweet almonds, 2 ounces of bitter almonds or peach kernels, 1 pound of sugar, 1 quart of cold water, 2 ounces of gelatin, 1 small cupful of cream. Boil the almonds 2 minutes, then take off the skins and pound them a few at a time with a mortar, adding a little sugar and a spoonful of water occasionally. Put the almond paste in a bowl with the rest of the sugar and the water and let steep a while. Dissolve the gelatin in a little warm water. Add it to the milk of almonds, the cup of cream likewise, and strain through a napkin with pressure. Set the Blanc Mange in molds on ice. Sweet dreams.